Hello, everyone. The webinar on security incident response planning will begin in a couple of minutes. Thank you. Good morning and welcome to part 3 of our IT Security Masterclass. This one entitled Security Incident Response Planning. It's going to be presented by myself. My name is Jonathan Lawless. I'm the Director of VCIO Services for CareWorx. I appreciate you taking the time to log in today. Fair warning, this is the first time that I've presented this as its own separate webinar, so I'm hoping that I can provide enough information for you to make it worthwhile and to have you leave with some valuable information at the end. As an agenda for this webinar itself, obviously I'll do a quick introduction of myself, which is done. We're going to cover the basics of what is a security incident response plan, why every business, no matter what the size, needs one, what the key components are to that plan, and then go through where to start in order to put one in place and really get the process moving. Again, my name is Jonathan Lawless. I'm the Director of VCIO Services for CareWorx. My role is to help our clients with IT strategy, compliance planning, and different high levels of IT initiatives, make sure that budgets are on track and we have the right plans in place for the organization. And a lot of the times that includes security topics, and things like incident response planning and different policies and procedures that need to be in place for compliance purposes. A little quick bit about CareWorx and who we are. We are a managed service provider located in Canada with offices in Ottawa, London, Toronto, and Summerside, PEI. You can see from the numbers on the screen there, we have approximately 66,000 devices in use. We handle around 500,000 or more tickets annually and have over 1 million end users that we support. The organization is set up in different areas, our primary focus being on our managed service component, which is an IT outsourcing or an IT support desk. We have a monitoring and automation service. We can do remote administration. We have a 24/7 service desk. We also have an ITSM platform based on ServiceNow, which we've customized for our clients as well. So, digging into the the security incident response plan itself. So, what is a security incident response plan? Technically, it is a documented, organized, and tested approach to addressing and managing the aftermath of a security breach or cyber attack, also known as an IT incident. Sometimes they're referred to as, incident response plans, IT incident response plans, even data incident response plans. But the key is that it's an organized document that's planned ahead of time to try to help manage and mitigate the loss caused by an incident or a breach. So the goal really is to handle the situation and limit the damages, reduce recovery time, and reduce the cost to the organization during an inevitable incident. Why every organization needs an incident response plan? There's many statistics out there, there's many stats out there that will tell you that it's to reduce response times, that it's reduce the cost, and those are definitely the goals. For me as a planner and as the person who provides advice and guidance on these types of things, the main thing is to help an organization get ahead of these problems. The last thing you want to do is end up making decisions during the crisis. When your computers are compromised, when people are in panic mode, they don't tend to make good decisions and they really don't know where to start. So the main reason for starting one of these plans and putting one in place is to make sure that you're not making these decisions during a time of crisis. It also helps you identify and resolve the problems before they come up. and erase any of the unknowns and move things forward so that when you have an incident or a problem, you're not discovering that the contact that you used to have at a certain location is no longer there. You're not discovering that there's a large gap and there's something that was forgot to be done, and that's going to prolong this incident and make it cost even more. And thirdly, it engages the organization and it increases awareness. So when everybody's aware that there's a plan in place and that security response or incident response is a focus, it gives them some time to think about what they need to do, maybe bring up some issues that you weren't aware of in the past. And so creating that awareness is vital to this whole strategy. Without that plan in place, there's a lot of risks involved. Formalizing the plan and going through the exercise of creating the plan is invaluable to the organization. As we all know, security events are inevitable. They're coming. You're going to be attacked. Whether they're successful or not is yet to be seen, but there's things out there or people out there that are looking for any way to get into any organization. So the main thing would be to plan on how you're going to deal with those before they come up. So what we've seen in terms of organizations without plans in place and what the industry reports on in terms of statistics are, firefighting, trying to figure out what to do after the incident's in place is very inefficient and can cause a lot of problems. There's no way without a plan in place to track any incidents that have occurred, or what your response was, what was successful, what was not. And a lot of times in regards to organizations that have compliance requirements, they need to track incidents, they need to understand when they were identified, and they need to provide reports to different governing bodies on when it was identified, what the breach consisted of, and what the response was. Without the formal process in place and without reviewing your results or going through the response after the fact, outcomes are not recognized, which means you don't track what threats have occurred, and it's very likely without changing the way you're doing things or making a change to the organization or to the security of the organization, those can reoccur. And having a formal incident response plan in place can really help walk through those issues and can put a barrier up from having the same incident happen over and over again, and from just making it more difficult for those to get into your network. So as we said, we all know that the incidents are coming. 90% of businesses have experienced an external threat in the last year. There's some interesting stats on here as well in terms of where the priorities lie and where the incidents are coming from. So no matter what organization you're in, the threats are real. The goal will be to make sure that we plan ahead and look at what those are and put some steps in place to try to prevent them. But even knowing that prevention isn't the only way, once the threat is in place, we need to understand what we're going to do and how we're going to react. Again, just wanted to put some more stats up here in terms of the reality of the situation with regards to threats and what happens. So the one I wanted to highlight here in the red box is that if you look on the second and third icon there, between 30% of businesses lost up to between 20 and 60% of their clients due to a data breach. That can all be mitigated if the breach is responded to properly, and if there's a quick response and a properly communicated response to the incident. A lot of times that damage can be reduced. Again, the one in the red box here highlighting the amount of damage that it's caused. Taking this from statistics, there's in Canada alone, the cost is around $1.5 million on average for an incident. So the goal of an incident response plan is, let's see if we can reduce the impact of those breaches. At risk of repeating ourselves, the goal being, or the plan, or what we can do when we get a management plan in place, is to improve the process itself. So increase the consistency, identify that response team, improve our threat detection through understanding where the gaps and the holes are in our process, improve the visibility across the organization by sharing information that we may not have known about, or sharing different gaps that we might not have known about during the meetings and during the creation of the policy itself. Clearly creating and clarifying accountabilities and responsibilities, not just for the planning side of things, but for the response side. Obviously controlling costs and then identifying opportunities for improvement across the organization. As you're, I'm sure, coming up to or reading about more and more, and maybe being forced to deal with more and more within your own organizations, are the compliance issues that are coming. Most organizations now are forced to be compliant in some form with some organization due to the data that they keep or the clients that they work with. These are some examples of different compliance or legal issues that require reporting and require an actual planned response. Two of the other ones that I didn't have a chance to put into this slide would include the PIPEDA, and the one that we're hearing about more now, more than ever, is the GDPR. GDPR being a European standard, but it requires reporting as well as PIPEDA's new changes require strict reporting on incident response and incident. As soon as an incident is recognized, that report needs to be in within a certain amount of time. So having an incident response plan in place facilitates that process, the process of coming up with the report and what needs to be in it, and prevents breach of those compliance issues. So now that we know why and what the plan is all about, it's important, I think, to talk about the steps involved in that incident response process. So there are several different governing bodies or different organizations that have put out standards and overviews of what needs to be involved in an incident response plan. This one that you see on screen here on the graphic is the NIST, the NIST version of the 7 steps or the 7 parts of the the 7 parts of the process. The preparation, detection, analysis, containment, eradication, recovery, and post-incident activities. There's other standards as well in terms of the ISOs, ITILs, COBITs, and quite a few others. The majority of which are very, very similar. Some have additional steps that are outlined. Some have fewer steps. It depends on which one. My recommendation would be to look at a few of these and pull from each one things that would be most relevant to your organization. Depending on the size, depending on the industry you're in, depending on the maturity level of your organization, a lot of the standards that they give out there won't be relevant, but you can definitely pull valuable information from each. So check my next slide. In my experience, and when it comes to planning, the recipe for that successful plan will definitely pull those steps. The preparation side, to me, is the most important, and it's probably the stage where most organizations are at now, at least the ones that we deal with on the small to medium size, the medium enterprise side. Either they have plans in place, or but they're out of date, or they're at a stage where they're just realizing that security threats and incident planning is a must, and they're working on what they need to do next in order to get those plans in place. So the very first step would be, define your clear responsibilities. Who needs to be on that incident response team? And not only who needs to be on it, but who's in charge. Not only who's in charge of the planning side, but who's going to be in charge during the response, whether that's dictated by different threat types, whether it's dictated by different data types, different shifts, different locations. It's important to clarify who will be responsible for taking charge during these situations. And if possible, breaking that down even further as to threat levels, times, and things like that, so that we have an understanding of when this happens, who does what, who's getting reported to first, and who's in charge of managing this whole situation. Step 2 is really understanding your organization. So understand where you are in terms of your maturity level. Are you reactive? Do you already have a lot of process and clear defined places and roles in place? what types of data do you have within your organization? Do you hold a lot of personally identifiable information? Do you hold different financial information? What's the most critical and where is it? What type of threats are typically associated with that type of data? Where are your backups? Where are the things that you're going to need to put in place and put into this plan on a step-by-step basis? And then determine what's most likely the threat to that type of organization. So if you're looking at an enterprise that is publicly facing and has information that could be dangerous or could be valuable to someone, then you're more likely to be attacked or threatened by organized groups, by the larger players in the game. If you're a smaller organization, protecting your own data and really protecting just the client information, it's a good chance that you're not a targeted threat. You may be more along the lines of a threat of convenience or a threat of opportunity where someone has put a virus or a malware out there. The idea behind the plan would be to identify where your vulnerabilities are and what the most likely types of threats are so that we can plan accordingly and understand the reaction that we're going to have. Once you've identified who in the organization is going to be on that incident response team and who in the organization is going to be in charge of the planning and in charge of the response, it's really important to assign the tasks and the instructions for each step of the way. Assign from an employee or an end user standpoint, if a risk or a threat is identified, what are they doing? Who are they contacting and how? Clearly lay out the exact information that they need. So contact information, contact names, what information you want them to provide to the person that they're reporting to. Are they going to report email addresses? Are they going to try to report more than that? And assign timelines to these as well. That list of tasks that we're going to create is both general, it's also threat specific. If we know that one of the typical threats that we've identified would be phishing attempts or clicking on a bad link in an email and looking for someone who's trying to install a Trojan or try to install a virus. That response plan by that end user is quite different than if we have an IT administrator who notices a breach in the firewall. What we need to do is clearly identify the steps and make sure that the people who are responsible for taking those steps have been trained and understand what they're to do next. And it should be very clearly documented within those steps, what they do, who they contact, and that should include contact information, everything we can find. One of the biggest steps that's missed, even when a plan is in place, and probably one of the most detrimental steps, or one of the most detrimental things to do would be to not test, not update, and not go through your plan beforehand. It's fantastic. It's a great exercise to go through. It identifies gaps when you're putting this plan in place and you're coming through with everything. If you haven't tested it and the pressure is on, there's a good chance there's things we've missed. So run a roundtable, get everybody who's involved, take an hour and run through the process, simulate an incident and make the people responsible, even if they're just walking through it, tell you what they're going to do next. Look for places where there's a gap where all of a sudden something stopped and nobody knows what to do next, where we haven't clearly defined what the next step or stage is or how we're going to get there. And then go back and redo the plan a little, adjust things as needed, and then retest them. It's critical to test. As I said before at the beginning, one of the worst things you can do is try to make decisions or make changes during a crisis situation. People do not react well during panic mode, and pressure is high when there's an incident in place. There's the roundtable incidents, which are definitely the first step and one of the first things that you need to do. The next step would be to run an actual, if possible, simulated incident. So get everybody, rather than around the table in the boardroom, actually have an incident run and planned out where you're at your desks and something happens, and run through it in real time. So sending the emails that need to be sent, sending the responses that need to be sent, creating the communications outward that need to be created, and see how long that takes, and again, looking for gaps. It's the only way to really hone this down and make sure that there's no errors in our process. And again, the last, which kind of ties to the same as the testing, and one of the areas that's definitely the most overlooked but very, very valuable, would be learning from the incident. So doing post-incident reports, doing post-incident evaluations, understanding not only where the threat came from and how the threat occurred, but how did you respond? How did the response work? What didn't work? Were there areas that you could have done better? Are there changes that need to be made? I think I have a question here. Oh, afterwards, yes, we can definitely send out, someone's asked if we can send out slides or copies of the slides for further reference, and I'll definitely get those out to everybody afterwards. Yeah, so as I was saying, on the learning side, it's important to have a formalized post-incident process and post-incident meeting to evaluate everything that occurred. Having the plan in place is ideal, but having the plan in place and repeating the same mistakes is not of much value at all. Once you've gone through an incident and you can clearly see where the incident happened, you can make changes to the actual physical security infrastructure, things like putting different antivirus in place, different security protocols around your firewall, different communications, but it's the process and the people and the planning stage that needs to be evaluated and needs to be corrected wherever possible. If an email was supposed to be sent, but the email address was not available, let's make sure that email is available. If somebody forgot to notify someone else or follow a chain of command in terms of communication, it's important that we identify that and get that out so that the plan can continue, or the next time there's an incident, the same incident doesn't occur. Communications during these incidents and before is also a vital step in this process. So internally, it needs to be an organizational priority, or at least needs to be made clear to everyone within the organization that security and security incident reporting and the response during an incident is a priority to the organization, or is important to the organization. Provide training to people, not just on the mandatory things like email phishing and social engineering. Provide them training on the plan itself, what their roles are, what their responsibilities are within the organization, and what their responsibilities and tasks are once an incident is identified. Make sure that even the end users know what their roles are, but then more clearly make sure that the people who are in charge and responsible for different steps within that incident response, that they know what their steps are, and if they have any questions, let's get them addressed. It's important during the incident. Once an incident is identified, it's very important that communication happens within the organization. So not just between the responders. Obviously, it's important for the person who's in charge of incident response to make sure that everybody is doing what they need to be doing. But whenever you've taken or executed a step within the plan, make sure that others who are impacted know where things are. Make sure that you're communicating out to all staff when there's an issue that's impacting them, in terms of you're aware of the incident, that the incident is being looked after. If possible, provide ETAs or an understanding of what the next steps are and what they can expect. All of this can reduce the impact to the organization in terms of lost hours, lost work, and reputation. And as we said before, individuals need to be trained, not just how to handle incidents, but how to identify them and what their tasks are. Communicating externally is also obviously critical. Externally being, is this a privacy issue that needs to be reported to the RCMP or to another governing body? Are there other affected bodies outside? Do your clients need to know that there's a breach in place? Do you need to take your website or something offline so that the breach is halted? And is that going to impact clients, or is that going to impact your partners that need to access information through that portal? Communication out to everybody impacted or potentially impacted shows a sign of control. It shows a sign of maturity, and it shows that you're on top of things, and prevents panic and prevents loss of business. So understanding those threats, understanding who might need to be contacted both internally and externally is all part of the plan. So one of the tips I learned about a year ago at a security conference, which I found invaluable and have added to a lot of the clients' security plans, is one of the very first steps you take when an incident is identified is to contact the legal counsel for the organization. Contact your insurance company second, but the very first thing you need to do, or one of the very first steps, needs to be to contact the legal counsel. The reason for this is the rest of your response, and the rest of the breach details, so the impact, the cost, what was breached, what was lost, is all now done under the confidentiality of your discussions with your lawyer, and does not necessarily need to be public access. So don't need the media getting a hold of it and putting their own spin on it or putting it out in the paper before you've had the chance to announce to your own partners and clients what that information was, or the details of the breach. So it's critical that you contact your lawyer and contact your insurance company and then take their guidance in terms of response and communications with everybody from the media to your partners to clients to prevent further liability and further loss to damage to your reputation or damage to the brand itself. Depending on the scale or the type of organization you're in, breaches like data or privacy breaches can be destructive not only from a cost standpoint but from a reputation and a brand standpoint. And so it's critical to manage the messaging to the media and the messaging outside the organization. Many of the policies we've created over the last year or so have had a reach into employee handbook in terms of what they're allowed to say during an incident to social media, over email, over phone, who they're allowed to talk to, and even go as far as, in some cases, providing updated communications plans and updated communications notes to employees as to what the messaging needs to be when they're asked about a certain situation. The goal just being to keep the message the same and to limit the amount of damaging information that's out there. So now that, understanding what the plan is and why we really need to have one in place, I think it comes down to, in a lot of cases, it seems like an overwhelming task, and the question becomes, where do we start? So how do we get from a place where we either have no plan in place or we have an old, outdated plan in place? Where do we start now to update that and to get to a situation where things are more in line with where we'd like to be? The main thing is actually start. So get away from the analysis paralysis and actually put some pen to paper and put some information down. Commit yourself to actually putting the plan in place and get buy-in from the organization itself. Create some fear and understanding that this plan is required, and get the buy-in from the people that you need to have. So whether that's senior management, IT management, whatever it takes to sort of get this moving and get the ball rolling, but the key is to get started. Understand where you are now. Understand what you have. Is there a plan in place? Is there an old, outdated plan that you can start with? Or is this starting from scratch because the organization has grown over the last little while? Like we discussed earlier, identify the threats that are most likely to impact your business. Are you a smaller organization that's most likely to be impacted by something like a ransomware or a virus? Or are you a larger organization that's with valuable information that could be either taken by internal employees and distributed, or searched and seeked after by the organized crime groups and the organized groups? If either one of those is the case, you need to understand where those at and what you're planning for. And then determine the maturity level of the organization, which I'm going to get into in a minute, which I believe is key to putting together a successful plan. Getting the right people involved. So along the lines of what I started with start, is engage the right people to make sure that this plan is not only in place, but that it's actually executable, and that those that have roles within it are actually allowed to, not only allowed to, but are asked to do it by their managers or by the senior staff. Do your best to make it a priority within the senior management so that it becomes part of the culture. And then, if possible, if there's no plan in place, or if you have an older plan that you'd just like to discard and start over, leverage your managed service provider or your IT support partner. Look for things like free templates online or templates from other groups that you used before. My personal favorite is the Infotech Research Group, but there's things like the SANS Institute, there's CSO and different organizations like that that can actually, that will actually provide free templates to help you get started, where you can add things in and take things out, but at least they'll give you that framework to really start your plan. With regards to organizational maturity, really to put a plan in place and put a really formalized plan in place with steps and stages and all kinds of reporting in an organization that really has no formal structure already, it'll be very, very difficult. Most organizations start somewhere, in the startup mode, and as they grow, they're very reactive, they're very ad hoc, they're struggling to put policies in place and procedures in place. The goal, obviously, of this plan is to be as efficient as possible. So you need to understand the way people react and the way people communicate with each other in order to make that plan something that's reasonable. As you see on the right here, this is what I think it's called the Carnegie Mellon capability maturity model. Most organizations fall between the 1 and 3 level. 4 is an ideal goal. 5 is a very difficult thing to achieve and probably not reasonable for most organizations. But the goal, and even as part of this plan, would be to get yourself into, I'd say, the stage 3, where things are defined. So activity is formally established, you have documentation, it's easily repeatable and tested, and it's integrated into other phases of your process. So you've clearly defined who does what, who's responsible for what, and how this is going to play out. As I said, if you're more along the lines of in the 1 to 2 range, then you need to plan accordingly and maybe work through putting more formalized process in place, or at least around your IT and around the security side of things, so that the plan is more effective. So understanding your threats, again, something we've talked about already, but you'll see a few of them here that I've put up. So spear phishing, SQL injection. It's critical to understand what's impacting your organization. In my experience in the SMB world, ransomware, viruses, and phishing, and then most recently has been accidental loss by staff or by a service provider. So one of the key areas that falls within this planning and that usually ends up being identified as a gap is things like third-party, we'll call it vendor management or vendor security. You have a lot of, whether you know it or not, you're going to have a lot of folks accessing your location, whether that's for remote support, whether that's for accessing and updating their own applications, whether that's the HVAC person that needs to enter and access your server room. Those are all people that pose threats, both either intentionally or accidentally, leaving creating an access password for someone that's left unattended or left open while they do their maintenance and then not shutting it off can cause a serious issue. So understanding where your threats are and really trying to plug those holes as part of this plan. So the plan will definitely identify gaps that cause a long-reaching, call it spider web of impact, where you're going to need to go out and figure some of these things out. My recommendation would be not try to bite it all off at once. Put the plan in place, test it and identify gaps, and then over a course of regular meetings, say monthly or even quarterly, try to take out 1 or 2 of those issues with every meeting and over the course of every time. Trying to tackle it all at once becomes a very big project that usually ends up falling by the wayside. It'd be much more effective to identify 2 or 3 things, and by the next meeting, whether that's a month or a quarter away, try to take those off the plate and then go back and test your plan again. Who to involve? When you're getting started, as we said, you got to involve the right people. In terms of the individuals needed, here the suggestions on the left would be the primary people that need to be involved. So your chief information security officer or your chief information officer, any senior management, especially those in charge of end users, IT people, IT support, any security. In the case of organizations that have a lot of information, a lot of databases, then those information owners and those responsible for maintaining and managing the data. And believe it or not, the building or facilities management staff. In terms of physical access, in terms of power, different things like that. Additional considerations usually on the external side, your legal department or your legal counsel, any risk management firms you have, and then external resources like your application vendors. Do you have a database vendor that's proprietary and you may need to engage in the case of any type of incident? Your data center or your hosting providers, make sure that they have a representative that can be available to you when needed, so that in the case of a breach, they can help you with tightening things down, shutting things off, doing a restore, things like that. But they need to be aware of your plan, and you need to be aware of who you're going to be reaching out to, who to contact, and how you're going to contact them at any given time of day. And same thing for your managed service provider. Use templates. I've found a lot of value in finding these templates online, whether you know the process or not, or whether you know what your plan wants to be or not. Having the wordings put in front of you with some suggestions that you can add in or take out as needed is a huge help. And a lot of them are built on the current best practices of like a NIST or an ITIL. So you can leverage those without having to start from scratch. Typically when I work with an organization, we'll go through step by step the different stages, determine whether there's key terms that need to be changed so that they make more sense to that organization's typical jargon or lingo. We will go through the steps to say not relevant to us, not our type of data, not the type of people we have responding, and really whittle it down to a more streamlined plan that's directly relevant to this organization. Once we have that in place, and that's typically done with a skeleton crew, usually the 2 or 3 that are in charge of the committee. Once that plan is in place, or that formal documents in place, set a meeting to review the entire thing step by step, and then get input on additions, subtractions from there, so that you can make it relevant to everybody. Doing it in a step or a stage like that, where you're providing initial document and then getting everybody's input, gets buy-in. It also opens everybody's eyes to their own process and their own responsibility within the plan. And I think it's important for making sure that this is successful moving forward. The more people you can have aware, the more people you can have take part in and put their input in and feel like they're part of that plan and part of the response, the better the response plan will be itself. Just checking to see if we have any questions here. Nope, looks like we're good so far. It's a little shorter than I'd hoped it would be, but we're coming up on the 40-minute mark, and I'd like to give you all a chance to get to your lunches. I appreciate your time, and hopefully I was of some help to you. If you're ever looking for assistance in terms of putting plans in place or best practices, what works, what does not, I'd be happy to help you at any time. My information again, jonathan.lawless@careworx.com. And I appreciate your time today. If there's any questions afterwards, please feel free to let me know. I'll get back to you as soon as I can, and we should be sending out these slides as well as a recording of the event as soon as we can. Thank you.